Late at night, two men in fake HOA uniforms forced their way into his house. One pulled a gun, but then he heard a low growl from the hallway. What happened next left the intruders begging for their lives. But let's start from the beginning. It was late evening when I heard the doorbell ring. Sharp, insistent. My heart skipped. I wasn't expecting anyone. My hand tightened around my phone as I opened the security app. Two men stood at the door, dressed in black uniforms with white HOA lettering on their chests. Their faces were blank, unreadable. My pulse quickened. HOA? At this hour? Something wasn't right. I stepped toward the door, opening it just a crack. "Evening, sir." The taller one's voice was flat, almost rehearsed. "We're with the HOA. There's been a complaint about your property violating community standards. We need to take a look inside." My gut twisted. Their uniforms were off. The fabric too thin, the badges hanging loosely, not aligned properly. The stitching on the sleeves didn't match. It felt wrong. "I haven't heard about any complaints," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. The shorter man's eyes narrowed. "It's urgent. Let us in." My grip on the door tightened. "I'll need to see some identification first." A flash of tension passed between them. The shorter man's mouth curled slightly upward. "You think we'd show up without it?" He reached toward his pocket. Instinct flared. I stepped back, but it was too late. The taller one slammed his shoulder against the door, sending it crashing inward. The edge of the door frame struck my side, and I stumbled back. My breath hitched. My phone slipped from my hand and hit the floor with a hollow thud. "Hey, you can't—" The taller man surged forward and grabbed my arm, twisting it behind my back. A sharp pain shot up my shoulder. "Shut up and stay down," he growled, shoving me to the ground. I hit the hardwood floor hard. My breath knocked out of me. My head spun. The shorter one crouched down, his face inches from mine. "Stay quiet, and maybe you won't get hurt." Footsteps creaked against the floorboards as they moved toward the hallway. My chest tightened with panic, until I heard it. A low, guttural growl from the hallway. Slow, menacing. My heart hammered. The shorter man turned toward the sound. "What the hell is that?" The taller one's hand hovered near his waistband. "Shit," I smiled. "You guys just made a big mistake." The growl deepened, footsteps scraping against the hardwood as the shadow in the hallway moved closer. My breath slowed, my smile widened. They had no idea what was coming. Duke emerged from the shadows like a missile locked on target. His muscles coiled under his dark fur, every step deliberate, predatory. His lips curled back, revealing sharp white teeth, and he let out a feral snarl that vibrated through the air. His eyes, locked on the intruders, burned with a lethal focus that sent a chill down my spine. And I wasn't even his target. One of the intruders froze, eyes wide with terror. "Holy shit, he's got a dog!" His voice cracked, the words tumbling out in raw panic. He stumbled back, nearly tripping over his own feet. The bigger one, the leader, pulled a gun from his belt with shaking hands. "Shut it down, or I'll shoot!" Duke's body tensed for less than a second before he launched forward like a coiled spring snapping loose. His jaws clamped down on the man's forearm with bone-crushing force. The sickening crunch of teeth breaking flesh and tendon filled the room. The guy screamed, a high-pitched, guttural sound of pure agony. And the gun hit the floor with a dull clink as Duke thrashed his head violently from side to side. Blood sprayed across the floor in jagged arcs. "Get him off me! Get him off!" the man shrieked, thrashing as Duke's jaws dug deeper. His face twisted into a mask of pain, tears pooling in the corners of his eyes. He clawed at Duke's neck, but the dog wasn't letting go. I pushed myself up, the rage in my chest burning hot and sharp. My heart was slamming against my ribs, my breathing jagged. "You break into my house and threaten me?" My voice was cold. "Now you're begging?" The second intruder bolted toward the door, his face twisted with terror. He didn't get far. Duke released the first guy, blood dripping from his muzzle, and pivoted with terrifying precision. He launched himself at the fleeing man, hitting him mid-stride. The force of impact slammed the guy into the floorboards with a loud crack. The man gasped for breath, clutching his ribs as Duke planted a paw on his chest and bared his teeth inches from the man's face. "Stop! Please!" he wheezed, eyes darting toward the gun on the floor. The first guy, his arm hanging limp and bloodied at his side, staggered toward the weapon, desperation twisting his face. "Oh no, you don't!" I lunged forward and kicked the gun across the floor. It skidded into the far corner of the room. The wounded man sagged to his knees, clutching his injured arm as blood pooled beneath him. His eyes darkened with rage. "You've made a big mistake," he hissed through gritted teeth. His breathing was ragged, shallow. "No," I growled, stepping toward him, my fists clenched at my sides. "You did." The guy under Duke was whimpering now, his face twisted in pure terror. His hands were trembling as he weakly tried to push Duke's massive paw off his chest. His breathing was ragged, shallow, and his eyes darted wildly toward the door like he still thought he had a chance to escape. "Call him off, please!" His voice cracked, bordering on hysteria. His legs twitched as he tried to inch away, but Duke let out a low, guttural snarl that froze him mid-movement. "I think we're past polite requests," I said coldly. My hand tightened around my phone as I pulled it from my pocket and dialed 911. My thumb hovered over the call button for half a second before I pressed it. The line clicked. 911, what's your emergency? "I've got 2 men impersonating law enforcement breaking into my house," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. "Sir, can you confirm your location?" Duke's growl deepened, the sound vibrating through the floorboards beneath my feet. His ears were pinned back, and his teeth remained bared, glinting under the low light. "Don't worry," I said, my gaze locked on the man beneath Duke. "They're not going anywhere." The second guy, the one clutching his bloody arm, groaned and shifted slightly against the wall. His face was pale, slick with sweat, and his breathing was labored. Despite the state he was in, there was still defiance in his eyes. "You're gonna regret this," he spat through clenched teeth. Blood dripped between his fingers as he pressed his hand against his injured arm. I crouched down, leaning in until my face was inches from his. I could see the sweat beading on his forehead, the raw panic flickering beneath his glare. "Am I?" My voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. A flash of red and blue light cut through the windows. Tires screeched outside as a patrol car pulled into the driveway. A sharp knock on the door followed, then the sound of the door being kicked open. Heavy boots pounded against the hardwood floor as 2 officers stormed into the house, guns drawn. "Hands where we can see them!" Duke's head snapped toward the sound. His ears perked up, but he stayed put, his body still pressed against the man's chest. I gave him a slight nod. "Duke, release." Duke hesitated for a second, his eyes burning with primal aggression, before he stepped back, keeping his gaze locked on the 2 men as the officers closed in. The officers pulled the intruders to their feet, yanking their hands behind their backs as they snapped the cuffs into place. One of the officers shook his head as he took in the scene. The blood on the floor, the gun in the corner, the torn sleeve of the intruder's jacket. "You're lucky your dog didn't kill them," he said. I smirked. "They're lucky I didn't." The man under Duke shot me a murderous glare as the officers dragged him toward the door. I met his eyes and smiled. Cold. Dangerous. Next time, they wouldn't be so lucky. Turns out, the 2 men weren't just fake HOA officers. They were part of a burglary ring that had been targeting the neighborhood. They'd been watching my house for weeks, waiting for the right moment. The police told me that if Duke hadn't been there, I would have likely been tied up and robbed blind. "That's a hell of a dog you've got," the officer said. "He's not a dog," I replied, looking at Duke sitting proudly at my side. He's family. The men were charged with home invasion, impersonating law enforcement, and assault. Last I heard, they were both facing serious prison time. As for Duke, he got the biggest steak I could find that night, and a permanent spot on the bed. I sat back, scratched Duke behind his ears, and smiled. Good boy.